And now let's go ahead and get started. So we have this evening, we have Callum Neff, a professional endurance athlete holding 3 Guinness World Records and the Canadian National 50K record, with hundreds of results worldwide in distances from 1 mile to 125 kilometers, fast marathons to grueling mountain ultras. Neff graduated from the University of Houston with a BS in psychology, where he ran track and cross country and now owns 2 businesses, Hard Loop Endurance and trail racing over Texas. His hobbies include hang gliding, paragliding, and volunteering with Texas Search and Rescue. He and his wife, Rachel, live in Fulshire, where they raise 4 daughters. Steve Magness is a world-renowned expert on performance and best-selling author of Do Hard Things and The Science of Running, and co-author of Peak Performance and The Passion Paradox. He is the co-host of the podcast Farewell and co-founder of The Growth Equation. He's written for The Atlantic, Runner's World, and Sports Illustrated, and he has been featured in The New Yorker, Wall Street Journal, and The New York Times, NPR, and others. He served as a performance coach and speaker for teams and individuals in the MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, and the U.S. military and numerous companies and organizations. He lives in Houston, Texas. And he has a new book available, Win the Inside Game, which, if you don't have a copy already, is conveniently available for purchase at the register behind you. And Steve will be signing after the event. So when we wrap things up and we start the signing, we're going to ask you to line up down this wall and come past the desk where Steve will be sitting and sign, and then you can exit out this way. So now let's get started and let's hear what these amazing gentlemen have to say. Please welcome Cal and Steve.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. That made us sound pretty good, Cal.
Oh, don't worry, I'm gonna make you sound pretty bad here in a minute.
That's not your job, man.
Well, you invited a good friend. So it's Steve and I, part of the intro that you didn't get is how am I sitting next to this amazing guy? We're on the track team at UH, and we've been friends, teammates, competitors, sounding boards, fellow parents, managing kids, how to get through that. I've traveled together, and we also have just been like your classic idiot boys. You have a very intelligent person sitting next to me that can write a lot of books, but at the end of the day, he's a human, and I think that's what's the beauty of this. And when you get to be a close friend to somebody, you have the dirt on them, right?
Oh, our dirt goes back a ways, long ways.
We did stay out of trouble in college. I think the worst thing we did was snuck off to Disneyland.
We did. We went off to Disney. Somehow, I'm just going to tell this story real quick. Somehow, Cal was a senior, I was a junior in college, and we wanted to run this big meet at Mount Sac, which was a distance meet, and we went to U of H, which is like all sprinters. And Cal and I were like actually legitimately good, so we wanted to go somewhere to run fast. And we convinced our coach to take us to Mount Sac. Except she didn't go.
Yeah,
they didn't send any coaches. They sent Cal and I on a plane.
With an envelope full of cash.
With an envelope full of cash to California. And we hitchhiked to the meet. Literally, we'd sit in the lobby and wait for someone to hopefully go in that direction.
Yeah.
That's how we got to meet, compete, and then came back. And then afterwards, we had some cash, so we went to Disney.
Totally legal, NCAA rules were followed.
Yeah, all clear.
But I think one of the biggest words that comes to mind with this book, and then just like with our lives, is like intertwined. So what Steve does a great job in this book with is intertwining his personal stories with other experts in these spaces from various theaters of what their professions are. And then bringing it back to like how can we apply it to our own lives, but yeah, the intertwining of just our own lives together, to like going to Mount Sac. That was the first race that I really did in the U.S. and that got me down here to the U.S. to have a scholarship. And there's been a lot of times where I think if we weren't on the team together, we would have crossed paths, which is really interesting. You know, the story that Steve opens up with, and we'll get into it, is being the whistleblower. And I actually had to come to Steve a couple times for various things, whether it be athletes or things that were happening about that were totally unrelated to being friends and teammates. So intertwining is really cool. But yeah.
I'm right there with you, man. So let's.
So can I make you sound bad first? Like, this is where I was going to open up. I'm going to do a few little readings. So tonight, I read the book, man. I finished at midnight. I'm not going to lie. I was cramming a little bit, but it was interesting to get a book that says uncorrected proof, not for sale, and not have it on Audible. It's like, I can't just put it on 2X and catch this in the car.
Go old school.
Old school reading, yeah. So I read a book. You should be proud of me, man. You obviously read a lot of books to make just this one. And what number is this? Number?
I don't know.
5?
5, maybe 4, 5, something like that. They all blend together after a while.
Yeah. And so I'd say like this one is talking to the intertwining. What I love about this is book number 1 was you puked on a napkin.
Yeah, pretty much.
It was a lot of science. It was a lot of training.
Yep.
And I think we've seen your writing really progress
and
since then.
And it intertwines with this book.
It does.
Because you know why I puked on a napkin for that book? Meaning, like, my first book is The Science of Running, which was just like science nerdum kingdom. Okay. If you read it, you're going to be like, what in the hell is Steve talking about? Because it just goes to the minutia of running. The reason I put that book out and just threw it out, and the reason it has a lot of typos in it, is because of the first story in this book, where I was whistleblowing. Because I knew that book, Science of Running, came out in 2013, and I blew the whistle in December of 2012, and it came to realization that I was like, oh shit, I might lose my job. I've got to find another way to get some income. And then with a short period of time, I wrote The Science of Running, threw it out into the world, and surprisingly did okay. People bought it, and that bought me income where I wasn't worried if I got fired from U of H for whistleblowing.
Diversified. There you go.
Something like that.
And so if you're not aware, get the book so you can hear the story, but I'd say Steve was wrapped up in probably the 3rd largest doping scandal in the world. Top being the Russian, if you watch Icarus, great movie. 2nd probably being Lance Armstrong, and 3rd being Magness here. Fully. Yeah, sorry, dude.
Me and Lance, just hanging out.
Russians, Lance, and Magness.
But you want to talk intertwined? I actually, when I was at Nike, for this whistleblowing thing, before it occurred, guess who came and trained with us? Lance freaking Armstrong.
BFFs with Salazar.
Well, that's the thing. I remember this clearly. This is before he went on Oprah, and he started talking. I mean, we're recording this, so maybe this will get me in trouble, but we'll go for it. It's just us in here. Before he went on Oprah and confessed all, he was training, and he went to Salazar and Nike to work on his running form and his training because he was going to go take on the triathlons and go dominate that stuff. And I remember after one workout, Alberto pulls me aside and he says, Steve, Lance, Livestrong, they have so much money. We should just be branded by Livestrong, and Lance should sponsor our team in addition to Nike. And then he turns to me and said, I mean, he's probably doping, but who am I to judge? And I'm just sitting there just being like, I don't know how to respond to this. I'm just going to walk over here. So anyways, there's my Lance intertwinement.
So the book is not solely really about this at all, but it kind of sets the stage for, I'm an expert at failing. And not just failing, but a special kind. Coming extraordinarily close to achieving the big goal and then falling just short. Consider the following. I was a phenom high school runner out of Spring, right? Damn near 4-minute miler. But I never made it to the state meet and track until I won my senior year because of the first 3 years I fell 1 place short every single qualifying race. On the track, I ran 4:01:02, never getting under the elusive barrier despite years of dozens of races. In high school cross country, missed qualifying for nationals by 2 seconds, falling 1 spot short. College cut it even closer, missing the NCAA championship by 6/100ths of a second in a race that took 30 minutes. And then in your early coaching career, as we just talked about, receiving your dream job at Nike, right-hand man to Alberto Salazar, and helping coach Olympians, only to have to rebuild because of what you saw and witnessed and blew the whistle on. As a college coach, right down the road here at UH, you helped young men go from the outside of top 100 in his event in the high school, building 20-meter lead at the NCAA championships. And I remember watching this live, cheering for Brian as he tripped on the final lap of the 3,000-meter steeplechase with a huge lead and fell short. And as a team, he finished third, second, and third at consecutive NCAA championships. Phenomenal performances, but always a few points short of the title. The trend continued in writing. Your books have fallen just short of making New York Times. You're an expert at near misses. I'm just tearing you down here, dude. You wrote that, though.
I did, because it's true. I mean, it's true. Literally the cool thing about looking into the audience is I can look at people and be like, oh, yeah, Jessica over there saw me miss every year at the district meet and not make it.
401
to make it. Yes.
District.
It was
impossible.
It was insane. And then, a lot of college athletes who were part of that. And, you were part of it too. But I think, I don't know, I'm probably going to miss again on this book. But thank you for supporting me, just in case I don't. But I think what it does is it puts you in this perspective of where it forces you to say, do I really enjoy this thing, even though it might break my heart? Because it still hurts. Like, you run 401 and you don't get under 4, it still stings. I mean, even now, it probably stings a little bit. You come close to coaching a national champion and them falling short. You come close to, having a whatever bestseller and just getting beat out by 30 books from a cookbook. It stings a little bit, right? But what it forces you to do is go back to, okay, why am I doing this thing? Because if you don't, it's going to drive you mad. And I think that, even though that's been the pattern, it's forced me, whether it's running, there's a reason, you and I still train and run and do crazy things, even though, we're kind of old now. Yeah. But we're still doing it, when we knew each other 20 years ago, and we're doing it. It's because, there's something about the sport where it's regardless of the result, something about the sport brings it into us. Same with writing. Regardless of the end result or the outcome or how many books are sold, there's something about it that it's no, this is exploring ideas. This is interesting. This is a passion that fills the cup outside of oh, I'm good at this. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the point.
Yeah, I think sometimes being unsatisfied is what just drives the next thing. And it's every single race we've done or pursuit that we've had, we always can micro break it down into how we've failed. But I think what you get here in your book is exposing yourself to put yourself out there and say that that's okay. And I think every single person in this room can, in their own scale of things, maybe not on the world stage, but have a relationship with that.
Well, I think what it is I think that, especially nowadays where there's social media and comparison of everything, and you can always find out kind of how much you suck because there's always going to be someone better. Always, there are very few people who are the top of the top in anything. There's almost always something better. It's easy to take that as a negative, or you can again take that in a way where it's okay, the comparison can kill me, or I can figure out what's the driving thing behind this. Why do I enjoy the sport? Why do I enjoy the writing? What is the purpose of it? Mm-hmm. And I think that is in a world where everything screams outcomes, achievements, accolades, even us sitting up here, we had all these wonderful things said about us in our bios. And a lot of times those bios become self-defining, but they're not. They're just a caricature of who we are. There's things that we've done, but they're not, I don't think Cal and I don't think oh, you won this race and did this. I think, oh no, that's that guy that I knew and bummed rides with to track meets and all sorts of crazy stuff.
I was kind of going to go there of who are you? I think because you get to that point of through this book, there's a journey that you're going to take of realizing how messy our lives are, and that's okay, accepting that, and then seeing, what other high performers are doing. But at the end of the day, to start that journey, you really need to go back and define and find clarity is your big thing. This book is largely about clarity.
It is, and I think that's why I wrote the book. Because I don't think anybody is like, it's kind of like trite and cliche. You say like, be yourself and other things, but we don't really pause and think about what that actually means. And I think this book was kind of like, I'm old and 40 now, so I get to have those moments where I reflect. It's kind of my moment of like pausing, reflecting, and being like, okay, let's look at this journey. And I think it also came about because, I started this book essentially at the end. It was like after 10 years of this whistleblowing thing, where it finally ended after 10 years in appeal after appeal after appeal. Like I was able to say, okay, let's let go of this. It doesn't have to dominate my life. Now I get to make sense of it. And to me, like that's what it's all about. It's the sense making of like who we are, what we're pursuing, and why we're pursuing. And if we can get clarity on that, that allows us to, I think, perform at a higher level. And then also do it in a way that doesn't make us miserable.
Yeah.
Because it's like even here, if this book sells, 1 million copies, I'll be happy. I mean, my wife will be very happy because we'll do well. But like if it sells 100,000 copies or 50,000 copies or whatever, like I still get to say like I wrote the book I wanted to write to help people and someone is going to benefit from it. And I think we lose that when we get caught up in the outcomes. And it's no different than coaching. Like I can stare at people I've coached in this room and think like, holy crap, I'm so lucky because I get to see them a decade later and see the impact that, little impact that hopefully grew on this one individual. Like who cares about their race results 10 years ago? I mean, some were good, but like who cares? Because you get to see like the development and you're like, oh, that was the impact. And it's a single person. And I think we lose sight of that, too much now.
I think there's a few things you mentioned there. Like you mentioned a lot of feelings that are in there. And I'd say, because I've studied like through UH and continuing through coaching, sports psychology, I'd say the biggest changes I've seen in that space, because you can only change or work on 3 things. There's mind, body, and your craft. So craft being like book 1, you wrote like, how do we train? That's just working on that. And there's a little bit of body in there because it's like, how do you improve your muscles and endurance and things like that. And then there's this whole thing on the mind, which was probably like more of the middle books you've written. And this one, and the advance in sports psychology, is kind of blending that mind and body to become like, how do you feel during that? I think that's like such a key thing, and I'm seeing it. I have a really big race on Saturday myself, and like my goal now is so far from like, I want to run this pace and time, the digits. I want to feel this way. Have you seen that yourself? Like just because you've obviously studied.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the great example the example that pops out that I gave in the book is like someone who I worked with for a couple of years who's a phenomenal person, Sarah Hall, world class runner, world class person. But in there, I tell the story of she was literally targeting. I think it was actually in Houston, the American record in the half marathon, and leading up to that race. She was talking to her husband / coach, Ryan, and she's like, we need to like forget the record. I don't want to target that. I want to target the feeling. And I'm going to butcher the quote, but it was something
I got
like,
it right here.
Good.
We decided instead, the goal wasn't a time, but the feeling. Flying along, stride fluid, flanked by amazing women, loving, finally getting a cold day. And we had that last weekend, that's for sure.
But that's what it is. It's like, I think it feels like nebulous. You hear like, oh, I want to hear a feeling. And you tell that to young kids or athletes and they're just like, what is this person talking about? Yeah. But here you have like literally one of the best in the world saying like, this reframing is what allowed me to achieve at the highest level because it freed me up. I wasn't worried about, the splits every single mile and that like creating that anxiety. And, I've worked with some really good athletes. In fact, we were having a conversation about one over dinner just before coming over here who, like, is totally on that side where she, like, doesn't wear a watch for almost anything. And it works for her. And she's one of the best in the world. And that's a little far for me. But, like, it works for her because, like, she gets into that, this is how I want to feel this workout. this is how I want to feel this race. This is what I'm trying to do. And it lets go of the baggage of like the outcomes, the performance, the self-defining part of it that I think often gets in our way. And I think, it sounds nebulous. It sounds kind of, woo-woo, wishy-washy. But I think there's like hard science and good data and great experience where like if we can lock into that, we're going to perform better.
We kind of have to go on that journey, right? It's like getting to wisdom. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
the mastery of it is.
That's what you hopefully get when you get our age, or maybe a little older. But I think there is that, because when you're young, and I see this all the time. I saw it with myself. I saw it with you too. Like when we were young, we wanted to be good. So what did we try and do? We were like, what are the workouts got to be? We've got to get this and this and this. And I remember these conversations on planes. You were like, should we do this lactate threshold run? Is our coach giving us the right thing over here? And we think the answer is in this. Yeah. And I'm sure our coach, I'm positive of us, was trying to pull us out of that, because I've done the same thing. Yeah. And it's really hard to. But we were convinced it was here. But the reality, it was probably like, hey, if we just showed up and did pretty dang good work for a long time and then got out of our way and said like, hey, I'm going to go into this race exploring my potential and seeing what I can do versus, showing up and being like, hey, I need to hit this split. And if I don't, I'm going to drive myself nuts.
Yeah. Well, look what happened after that plane ride. We went to Mount Sac and we both tanked awfully.
That's why we went to Disney. We had to be happy.
That was a bad race.
Cheer ourselves up. But that's what happens. And I'm sure, again, we're going to talk a lot of running here, but it translates to life, because like if you get so obsessed with the thing, you get so attached to it. And when it's so attached to it where your mind, your brain, and there's neuroscience on this, your brain essentially says, okay, Callum is only thinking about the splits and this time that he needs to run. This is all that matters. So you're priming your brain when you go into that race to only focus on this. And what happens is if you're just a hair off, your brain goes like, oh shit, Callum, you're off, like shut it down, stop trying. Mm-hmm. And you have that devil in your head that just convinces you, slow down, you're not going to get your goal. And I think that we're all susceptible to that, and it applies to life as well. So to me, it's like, well, if we've already got that external pressure in these outcomes that are staring us in the face, like we've got to have something pulling on the other direction. And to use a non-running example, like for the educators in the world, you see this in the classroom, right? When you are literally teaching to the test, and then the test defines either your result as a teacher or your result as a student, it can drive kids nuts, right? And I'm not saying don't, no outcomes, forget about it, no winning, whatever. But we need to like balance the approach where it's like, yeah, the outcome matters. Yeah, the race, who wins, loses, whatever, matters to a degree. But at the same time, we need this other thing, that chasing that feeling, the joy, the experience, the feeling of flying along with other competitors.
Yeah, what you said at the end of that Hall story, another great intertwine, because I ended up being her pacer.
Yep.
When she ran 2 hours and 20 minutes. It was the second fastest American time ever. We were chasing 2:19:36 on the day during the pandemic. But just, cool to read, like so many little nuggets in there. But you said let go was the final kind of quote that I pulled from that, just being able to let go.
Well, I think there's this again, if I put myself in, very talented, hardworking, but maybe not very bright 18-year-old Steve's head, he was convinced, and most people are, that the path towards excellence is just like single-minded obsession, like I'm gonna go all in and burn the boats behind us. Yeah. And it's just not. I mean, some people might get away with it, like maybe Michael Jordan did, but he was kind of miserable doing it, and is kind of still miserable. But most of us aren't Michael Jordan. And what the research actually shows is that even in entrepreneurs, business people who tell you go all in, is those who don't early on, who like keep their day job, have a higher success rate. Why? Because like when we go all in, what does our brain do? It says like, it's the Cal or Steve saying the splits are all that matters. And if you tell your brain this is all that matters, you don't go in a place where you're free to perform. You go into a place where your brain goes like, this is do or die, survive or not. And I don't know about you, but like that's not the stress response that you want to perform well. That's the stress response you want if there's a lion in front of us and, we got to survive it. That's not how we perform well. So I think there's this balance between caring deeply where, yes, we have to be driven. Yes, we have to be disciplined. Yes, we need all those things. But at the same time, you have to balance it out with some degree of letting go, meaning the outcome's not self-defining. And it's that hard spot to find, but I think this is why you see it, especially in endurance athletes. They find it in their mid-30s where they start to get that wisdom of like, oh, okay. And in the book, I talk about even the greatest skateboarder ever, Tony Hawk, right? When to get this trick that he'd been chasing for so long, the 900, his good friend and fellow skateboarder told him, hey man, you need to risk not winning. Which to Hawk meant like, stop thinking about getting the thing and going back and enjoying the thing. And once he got back to his roots and enjoyed skateboarding and stopped chasing the thing, guess what? He got the trick. Because there's this tension between caring deeply and letting go. If we care too deeply, we get attached and we kind of get blinders on and can't perform.
Yeah, and what you said on that I really like too, and I kind of like really ruminated on it, was to be challenged but not threatened. And you said that in the book, and I really thought a lot about that, because so many times when we put ourselves out there in any type of performance, a race, or even in the office, it's just like you feel like your life is literally on the line, and then you're right, you go to these like really primitive caveman brains of fight or flight. At the end of the day, with all this science and everything we have and tools available, at the end of the day, we just have like very binary responses, and there's a lot you link into that, why. There's a lot of chemical response and biological things going on there, but I think finding a safe place where you feel challenged, because we don't advance in really anything without some pressure, without some adversity. It can help accelerate growth.
Yeah, it's that, and this is why I wrote the book, it's that nuance, right? So often in the performance space, we get told these like binary things of like, again, go all in, like whatever it is, whatever the cliches are. But the reality is, like, if you live in the space or you help people in the space, whether it's coaching or other things, you realize the nuance of it. And that's what it is it's like that challenge versus threat of like, how do I help someone who obviously is going to be nervous, who obviously is going to have anxiety about it, like see this through a lens that switches their kind of brain-body connection to say like, no, it's okay. And I see this as a parent. I have, a 20-month-old and a 1-month-old, but the 20-month-old, Hazley, we saw this the other day. So we went to swim practice. Yeah, they have swim practice for toddlers. She can hold her breath for 7 seconds. She's a rock star in the pool. But we go there, and there was this new little toddler with, his dad, and the dad had this huge beard. And we get in the pool. Hazley's all excited. She's like, yeah, we're going to swim practice. We get to dance and sing and then like go underwater a little bit. And then she just like sees this guy with a beard, and it was like this pure terror. And she just like clings to me, and it's like, I don't want to go anywhere. Like I am like death grip on dad and no more swimming. And you can see that primitive nature. Like she's excited. It's challenging to hold her breath. Sometimes she opens her, mouth a little early and chokes and cries a little bit, but gets over it. But because of the bearded man, like she went into threat mode. And that was me as a dad being like, okay, how do I show her that like it's a safe, secure environment and like we're going to be okay and bearded man isn't going to get her?
No, you have to be the bigger silverback gorilla and beat that man. Show her.
That's
her
what
dad.
I needed to do.
Yeah.
We needed to throw fists in the swimming pool.
I'm glad you brought this up because this is the one place I've been that you really haven't, but it sounds like you're starting to get a glimpse of it. You write all these books on performance and sport and everything, but you haven't been a parent on the sideline really. But I just heard glimpses of a different side of Steve, because he's like, my kid can hold breath for 7 seconds. That's really good. And, that kid sucked. But not going to get there. But I'm sure you were thinking of it. And it's very different to be the parent on the sideline. I found myself at some of the early soccer games, like 7-year-old soccer, my daughter playing, and like I have to walk away. And like you try to be, you think they're like puppets and like you can control it, like you can see all the clear things that they should be doing. It's very difficult to be a parent on the sideline, and it changes like how you react. So I'm interested to see you grow in this space.
I'm looking forward to this. I'm ready for soccer. We're gonna throw her in there or whatever it is. But it is because it's that tension. Why? Because you obviously care. You want the best for your child, right? You want them to succeed. You want them to have fun. You want them to enjoy the thing. But then there's like that other side where you become that parent who's like everybody sees and you're like, oh gosh, like that one's a little crazy over there. Like they're too into it.
Yeah.
And I'll say is what I try and do, and I'm lucky because my wife's the elementary school educator. So, at that age, I'm just like, go to her, tell me what to do. But I also got to see it on the other side because I got to see like, both when I started coaching high school kids and then college kids, is I get to see all the parents and I took notes. I was like, you know what?
It's the hardest part.
That parent's pretty chill. Like, how do they do that? That one's a little over the top, Or that kid gets really nervous when mom or dad shows up. I'm like, I can see why they get nervous, but like, don't do that. Or I'd get these emails. These are the favorites. These people never made it on the team, but the emails from the parents who are like convinced that their like 14-year-old kid was going to be like this future Olympic prodigy and just needed X, Y, and Z. And you could tell that the parent was driving the ship and the kid was just like, I'm just doing it because mom or dad told me to. Yeah. So I think there's like that balance, and like I'm enthusiastic, I'm a coach, I love the stuff, but I'm going to try and keep in the back of my mind some of those lessons that I saw on the other side of it.
If I could give you some advice here, what I've learned.
Let's do it.
Just be a fan, of your kid. I mean, that's kind of what I've had to learn, and it's like you're saying in the book of just like, how did it feel? It's like, just when they get in the car after, because that's probably as an athlete, as a teenager, like going home from a high school meet. Yep. I'm sure you've been there. I know I've traveled with your parents, so I know that they're very supportive of you as an athlete in the hard times. But it's just like to not analyze the game is the hardest part as a parent. But just to say like, I was so happy just to watch you do your thing. And leave it at that.
Yep.
Even though you have a lot more to say.
No, I mean I think that's smart, and that's like the advice that even though I haven't been in that spot is like I try to tell parents the same thing. Is there's different roles, coach and parent. If I need a coach, I'll just go find one of these former athletes that are coaching and be like, hey,
there you go.
Take care of Hazley, show her the ropes, like let her learn stuff. Don't let me coach her. But I think again, what that gets at is like the complexity of our self and just kind of knowing the roles in those situations.
Yeah, that's an interesting tangent. Sorry, you had to talk about dadding, girl dadding here in parenting.
But here's the thing, and we can go on tangents all day, and this could bore people to death. But we'll open it up for questions in a minute. But the whole point, and what I hope people take away from this is that performance is performance. So we're talking about dadding, right? Mm. And we both have daughters. Like there's no sons anywhere, so we're lucky girl dads. But we're talking about like parenting, and we're talking about coaching, and we're talking about writing, and we're talking about like our just general life living and exploring things and whistleblowing. And the point is, I think often what happens is we compartmentalize these things and we say, oh, this is different over here. You have this experience in this world, but it doesn't translate over there. And I think that's bullshit. I mean, quite frankly, I just hung out with a bunch of former athletes and they're all sitting there being like, whoa, you told us that this like running would translate into our work life. Like, but I didn't believe you, but it does. And it does, and sometimes we have to learn that lesson, but I think that's the point, is like we're all trying to figure out and how to navigate challenges, and the specific nature of those challenges differ, but like the tools behind handling them are there's a lot of overlap there.
Yeah, and it kind of comes back to just like defining who you are at the end of the day. Like, what are your thoughts, your words, your actions? Like, when you get cornered in whatever space that is, do you have the clarity, the conviction? Do you have the consistency when you're exposed?
That's what it is. It's like you're exposed, and that exposure could be you're out running a race, and it's like you in your head, and you're like, well, I could slow down or step in this hole and fall down and get out of this race.
Yeah.
But like, and if you have that clarity, it's like, no, that's not who I am. That's not what I do.
Right.
And I think it's the same. I can remember way back in the day when I was about to blow the whistle, and no one wanted me to.
Yeah.
So my parents, they're great. Cal knows them. Other people know them. They're the best in the world. But they were like, no, don't do that. Just stay quiet and get a new job. Like, we don't want to deal with that. You don't want to deal with that. And they were probably right, because it did suck. But in the pit of my stomach was like, no, like this isn't who I am. This is going to gnaw away from me if I have to sit here and be quiet, because like I saw some stuff that was kind of shady, and I got to say it and get it off my chest, because like that's who I am.
That's who you are.
So I think it comes back to like that clarity on who you are, like what matters, how you define success in your pursuits, and also like who are your people? Like, where do you belong? Because like those are the people who are going to be with you through thick and thin. Like, I know I can call you up even if we haven't talked for a while, because like we've been through a lot of stuff for a long time, right? I hope many of the athletes here know that, like, and some have, like, can call me up, and even if we haven't talked for years, because like you have that support and that relationship. And when you have that clarity on where you belong, like how you define success and who you are, it frees you up to kind of pursue the things that you want to in the way that you want to.
Perfectly said. That's what the book is all about.
All right.
I'll get into a couple little questions, then we'll open it up to people. What time do we have? I'm not even sure. 7. Okay, perfect timing. There's one part, we did talk a little bit about the biological responses. How do you activate the dorsal, medial, prefrontal cortex? Is there like some illegal way I can do this? You talked about zapping mice and the response they had of like winning and their aggravation or perseverance in the next game of fighting other mice, basically. It's back to the pool. But that was interesting. There's like definitely these like chemical responses that we have when we win or when we lose. And
so my favorite one on this is, I have no idea how to activate that, but I wrote about it, so I should. But my favorite one of those studies was is they took a bunch of rowers, I think it was, and it's called the winner and loser effect. And they took a bunch of rowers, and the researchers put them up against each other, a bunch of men rowers, put them up against each other, except they fudged the results. So no matter how fast the rower actually rowed their 2K time trial or whatever, they shifted it to make it where, maybe the slower person won. And what happened is their biology went wherever the researchers told them that they finished. So if they won, even though if they were slow as shit, like they got this boost in testosterone and adrenaline, and they went into that next competition and felt better and performed better. Even though the first one, they were horrible. Why? Because the perception like shifts our biology. My favorite part of that study, though, is afterwards, they went and took those rowers and essentially put them in front of a bunch of females. And the ones who thought they won were more likely to go like try and get a date.
We had it all wrong, man.
So we did.
We had it really wrong back in the day.
We didn't know what we were doing. It all worked out. But it's just fascinating that some of these like biological and psychological things that like intertwine. And to me, what it says is like, no, don't fake people into winning. But what it tells me is like how you conceptualize those wins or losses, because like it's manipulatable. And there's other research that shows this. If I like fail or lose a race and then I stew on it for a really long time, guess what? I'm going to have that negative, hormonal response, and then I'm going to be in a bad spot. If I can just deal with it and maybe like hang out with my friends so I can get over it quick, I'm not going to have that bad biological response, and I'm going to be okay so that the next time I can, perform better.
And some of the best performers are just so good at getting over those little things. Well, they seem big at the time, but yeah. One more, you mentioned in the book that you're always already writing the next one, and it's kind of like we were talking about, like this pursuit of, never really satisfaction. So like, what are you working on next? Are you already writing? Are you being?
Man, you're just pushing me here. I'm already outlining. I'll put it that way. I've got the ideas there.
Great.
The publisher likes the idea. We're going for it after I get through book launch and
Very
1 month old.
I got one more, I guess, talking about that process of like writing the outline in the book. What was some of your top interactions? Like you talk about some of your favorite studies, but maybe give one, like if you were in person or somebody you talked to as part of the interview process that you really got to connect with.
My favorite one, and I mentioned it in the book, it didn't take a lot of space, but I wish it would have gone longer, is this interaction with this guy who has Parkinson's. And he showed me all these crazy videos where, normally he can't walk well, he's shaking a little bit and stuff. But if he would manipulate essentially his physiology and his body, he would be able to do things like dribble a basketball and shoot a basketball, right? Or like other stuff. And it was all this weird stuff. It was like literally if he started walking on grass versus concrete. If he got on the bed, he could jump on the bed. And it wasn't him like faking it. What we found out, or what the hypothesis is part of it, and it's early Parkinson's, but part of it was like his brain saying, are we safe or not? And if it was convinced we're safe, meaning we're on a soft surface, his body kind of let the reins loose a little bit. If it was convinced there was danger, meaning like I could fall on this hard surface and injure myself, like he was very shaky and uncertain. And there's a lot of research to go on in that field, so we don't have any conclusions. But that was probably one of the most fascinating and really kind of heartwarming, things to talk to, because it took it out of the, how do we run faster or score more points or whatever, and put it into like a life perspective.
I have actually a really close friend that he couldn't hold this book steady. The hand is always going, but you give him a camera, and he is a professional photographer. Wow. That's what he does for a living, and it's incredible that it just everyone can find that space that they feel safe.
Yep, that's what it is.
Very interesting. All right. I'd love to open it up. Hope everyone enjoyed that. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening to us. We'll have, if anybody has any questions, and then we'll sign
and then
some
I'll
books.
just repeat it just because we are recording, and ask away. Anything.
I have one. So as he mentioned, I've known him for a long time. I've known him since we were in high school together. You may have gone to Disney with him, but I've TP'd houses with him.
There you go.
Got all the dirt.
Yes, well, not all of it, but like you, I'm lucky enough to know his parents, and so you mentioned that despite like all of the setbacks and despite the near misses and all of that, you still kept going. You still had that passion. How crucial was a strong foundation in being able to, because you were raised really, really well. You have fantastic parents. You have a wonderful family, and so like how crucial was that strong foundation to say, like you said just a minute ago, you had that safe space to keep pushing and to keep going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's vital. I mean, the third section of the book I call Belong for that reason, because I think if you have the support system, it makes the difficult manageable. Because like no matter what happened, like I had people who were going to have my back, support me, what have you. Even on the whistleblowing stuff, they were like, oh, we don't know if you should do this. But once I did it, they weren't like, oh, Steve, you're an idiot. Like, why'd you do this and make your life so hard? They were like, we got your back. Like, let us know what we can do to help. Let us know when you need support. Let us know if you need a way to navigate things. And I think, I was very fortunate, as you said, to have wonderful parents and, brothers, sisters. Sister just ducked out of here early, but she's great. But to have like that support network where you have people to count on. And I also have like really good friends of that. And I think what it does is it allows you to take on the challenges and be able to say like, you know what? Like at the end of the day, like I'll be okay. I mean, it reminds me of something that I probably told some of these athletes before races. I'd come up and they'd be super nervous and I'd be like, look, if you lose this race, am I gonna hate you? And they'd be like, no. Well, hopefully they said no. And I'd be like, you know, are your parents gonna disown you? No, they're still gonna be here. They're gonna support me and love me. And you just go through the cycle and you realize
and
that
exactly that challenge, not threatened.
That's
that
it.
That's it. So much of my coaching is that.
Yeah.
It's like, I said that exact thing to my pre-Houston Marathon dinner.
Yep.
It was like, you're gonna go home and your families don't even care what time you ran. They don't even know what's good.
I mean, it's the greatest part about having young kids is like I can show up and whatever happens, like, you know, hugs, kisses,
it doesn't
whatever.
matter.
It doesn't matter. And I think that support and that perspective like frees you up because like you can take risks instead of playing it safe or instead of playing out of that fear place where you're just like, oh, you know, what if I fail? What if I do things wrong? And in fact, if you look at the research, like fear of failure is one of the primary drivers of people quitting things, you know, essentially early. Because they just get so overwhelmed of the thought of failing and what that represents that they don't even give themselves a shot.
Yeah.
And I think it's mostly about, hey, how can you give yourself a shot? Because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Fear of other people's opinion. FOPO, I think that's Gervais.
Yep.
You've crossed his path a few times.
Yeah, that's huge nowadays. Social media.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions?
You know, I was thinking about this aspect from a parenting, raising kids. My kids are a little bit older, but this aspect of being goal-driven and outcome, and as they mix their identity with whatever they think they're pursuing. And what I've heard you talk about is, you know, separating that identity of the process, journey, not the destination type of thing. I wonder for, you know, as an adult, having had some success in whatever and realizing that it didn't really fill whatever bucket, and then being able to get to that place, can you teach that to the younger generation, or is that something that they have to discover on, you know, do you have to find the emptiness in your chasing a goal before you can get to the place of being satisfied in the journey?
That's a great question. And what I'd say is it probably varies with every individual. I think as a parent or as a coach, when I would try and instill this stuff, there were things that I knew that I would repeat and tell over and over again that they just weren't gonna listen to it until it like experienced it or sunk in. But I think this is where, you know, as a coach, what I do is I'd call it like, I'd drop these seeds knowing that they might not flourish right now, but that at some point they might realize and come back to it and be like, oh, this is what he was talking about. Or I'd look for those opportunities where it's like, okay, we're almost in this, not vulnerable spot, but the spot where we're open to understanding and learning. Because maybe our race didn't go as planned, or maybe we didn't get into the college that we thought, you know, we were shooting for. Those are like the opportunities for like those brief moments where it's like, okay, let's plant this seed and let's reframe this to make us maybe just nudge away from that outcome spot as well. I think it's really hard for the younger generation, even harder than we had it, because again, everything, you can see results on anything. They're always judged. They're always
what
compared.
I pulled from the book too was, you know, at some point it's actually, yes, they do have to learn that themselves. It's okay to lose. In fact, there's a whole chapter on learning how to fail, learning how to lose. Like, that's why, I mean, I think youth sport exists, really. It's to go through those.
And I think it's on us to, like, if you're an adult in there, it's like, okay, and that's why I wrote the chapter, is like, what does it mean to learn how to lose? Well, I can ingrain this fear mindset. Right? If you're, to use your example early, if you're the parent in the back of the car just like, you know, screaming at your kid or telling them everything that they did wrong when they lost, what's that kid's going to internalize? Like, oh God, if I lose, like my dad's going to grill me.
Yeah.
Like that's not...
And it also turns out there's some wiring and chemicals and things going on that we didn't even know about previously.
So I think it's our spot is like, okay, how do we help them navigate them? Yeah. We're not going to be able to force feed, hey, process over outcome or whatever, because they're going to think it's bullshit. Because I probably would have when I was that age too. But in fact, side note and story, but like I kind of did. I remember when I was 19 or 20, I just happened to work with this sports psychologist who worked with all these like Major League Baseball players and some Olympic athletes. And he just, started talking to me and then took an interest and was like, hey, I'll talk to you. We were at a track meet thing. And he was telling me a story. He said, I work with such and such runner. You know who that is? I'm like, absolutely. They were one of the best in the world. And he said, she struggled for a couple years transitioning from college to pro. Like she didn't make the Olympics the first go round. She won blah, blah, blah. And I was like, this guy's going to give me the secret. I'm ready. 19-year-old Steve's ready. And he says, you know what helped her make that transition? Allowed her to become one of the best in the world? I said, no. He said, knitting. 19-year-old Steve did not take that lesson. But what he was trying to say is she was so obsessed of running and training that she'd come home and worry about what she just did and what she was going to do next week. And it drove her nuts, so she never was able to perform at her potential until he worked with her. She found a hobby that she kind of liked and had found somehow a bunch of other knitters that she could go hang out with and knit together. And all of a sudden she was going home and not thinking about the mile repeats, but she was like, sweet, whatever, I'm going to go hang out and knit some stuff. And that was the difference maker. So I didn't listen.
Did you start knitting?
I wish I did. Was I knitting on the plane?
Knitting on the plane?
No, but it's like it sounds simple, but like those things can matter a lot. And no, sometimes we're not going to listen, but I think we got to plant the seeds because you know what? 2 decades later, that knitting story like reminded me of like, okay, this matters.
That sounds like it almost sounds like a function of it slightly lowers the stakes, right? Because if it's only running, the stakes are impossible. But if it's running, but also you've got friends to knit with, it's that little dose of additional.
Your identity is not threatened.
You're not, and that's what it is. That's exactly what it is. It lowers the stakes, so it's not. You run a race or you do your test or you do your thing, and it's not, oh my God, I am a failure if I don't win. It's, I lost this race. It's something. It's not the whole thing. And I think, we fool ourselves into thinking that like, oh, we perform best when our back is against the wall. When the reality is, and there's research on this, like 99.9% of people are not built that way. If you were, like you probably wouldn't survive, right? Because you need the stress hormones to work in the way that they work for most of us. So we're not meant to be that way, but we talk as if we are. And I think that backfires. I think it reminds me of a good friend, Phoebe Wright, who was a world-class runner, told me once when she was lined up at the Olympic trials final, which was literally career-defining. She got 4th. She didn't make it. So maybe this isn't the best advice, but I think it's good. Is she would line up for that race and think, oh my God, my whole career is on the line. My contract is up. If I don't do well here, I might not have a job, right? This is it. So what does she tell herself? On the line, she looks around and she says, no one gives a shit about track and field. Because there's truth to that. Like no one cares except every 4 years and like whatever. And that was just enough to take that edge off to allow her to, and she performed very well to get 4th. She did phenomenal. But just enough to take that edge off where the stakes aren't, this isn't life or death. Like this is a game we're playing.
Yeah.
Thank you. really appreciate everything you've said. And, a lot of the work that I do is integrating mind, body, spirit, and heart, and taking my practice on the mat or on the cushion into the world. And I really appreciate both of you talking about that, because where we are right now in the world, to know that we can be in spaces that we can belong just the way we are is enough. Just the fact that we are here is enough. But I am still curious, how did you navigate whistleblowing? Because that is not easy, and you said everybody said, no, don't do this. But there was, besides knowing this is what I need to do, I'm just curious from this heart perspective.
So the question is, how did you navigate whistleblowing
Through your heart.
through your heart? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think what it did, and it's hard to piece it apart, but it really came down to, like, I felt this, like, feeling whenever I'd be like, no, just let it go. Or, like, move on, focus on this over here. And I just kept getting drawn back to, like, no, it's not even who I am. It's like, this isn't how I was raised. This isn't what I stand for. I can't live like this. And it's almost like this internal burden where it's like, you know what, whatever the consequences, like, I need to be able to live with whatever choice that I make. And, like, that feeling I couldn't live with of not doing it. And part of it was too, is I remember this moment very clearly as I was having a conversation with another athlete who was one of the very few in the world who also knew what was kind of going on. And we just saw this news that this young runner named Mary Kane had joined the program that we were part of, or I was part of. And at that time, Mary was, 16, 17 years old. And I just remember getting this sinking feeling like, oh my God, this poor teenage girl thinks she's, like, won the lottery and she's about to step into a nightmare and she has no idea. And her parents have no idea. And this is going to be a disaster. And sadly, it was a disaster. Like, you can research it, but it was rough. Mary had it very, very tough. But I remember in that moment, like, thinking, like, whatever happens, like, I gotta tell somebody who can do something, because, like, people gotta know, because then they can at least have the knowledge and understanding when they're going into that decision that Mary didn't, that I didn't, that many other people didn't. And that was the thought where I literally, I think 2 weeks later, as I wrote the email to US Anti-Doping and said, like, here's what I know, have at it. And that was, like, one of the thoughts that drove me. So I think, like, it was a mixture of all this stuff that just kind of, came together and, pushed me to be able to handle it.
Didn't you used to keep posters on your wall of, like,
yeah,
looked up to, and every time somebody was caught doping, like, you would take their poster down?
I did. My wall became very bare. I've got a picture somewhere.